Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This, of course, is episode number 77. Now, since last week, I looked at, of course, the very first Michael Schenker Group album, which was produced by Roger Glover. This week, I am going to take a look at the time that Roger Glover decided to produce the third full-length album for Danish heavy metal band Pretty Maids. And it's titled Jump the Gun, or and sometimes also referred to as Lethal Heroes, when it was given its CD release at the time of its release. So, Jump the Gun was released back on April 20th, 1990, so that means it's already hit its 30th anniversary. And of course, me picking this album anyways is also due to the fact that I had also have gotten the original albums classics box set that was released for at least Pretty Maids, which of course features many of the albums, at least their first 5 full-length albums. Everything from, of course, Red Hot and Heavy up to about Stripped. Alright, so Pretty Maids, if you're not very much familiar with this band, like I stated, they are from Denmark, and we're definitely one of Denmark's premier bands alongside Merciful Fate, or King Diamond. Definitely one of Denmark's biggest bands to come out of there. So, again, I should also be going into a little backstory. Again, Pretty Maids were formed in 1981, and pretty much have released at least 2 demos, both in 1982 and 1983, and then one more demo in 1984. But in 1983, they released their very first EP through, of course, Bullet Records, which had a much different cover, since what you probably are seeing on your screen right now is the CBS repress, I think, of this of the sound, which of course featured artwork from let me see if I can try and get his name correct. Joe Pegno? God, I think I might have butchered that. I have a hard time saying his last name. He, of course, is best known for, of course, the War Pig from Motorhead. He is the one for also doing many of those classic artworks as well from Motorhead. But he is one that drew Motorhead's mascot. And he had plenty of other artwork for a lot of bands, but he did do plenty of artwork here for Pretty Maids. And the artwork that's being used for the CBS release here, which again you're seeing on your screen, is of course was used for the Waiting for the Time single. So that was kind of used here, and it got reused for this EP. Anyways, though, definitely this was a classic EP, and definitely began another good slew of good albums when they again released their very first full-length album, and being their proper major label debut. That's, of course, is 1984's Red Hot and Heavy, which is still my personal favorite album from Pretty Maids. This is definitely just a classic, solid, old school metal record. Though definitely melodic, definitely can hear some of that kind of, again, very much, I wouldn't say AOR, but you definitely get a little bit of that. We're very keyboard laced, but it just has a way of adding to the atmosphere of the sound, and I love the raw production here. This is just, again, just a classic mid-80s heavy metal record. Just a great album overall. And then, of course, they followed up with, of course, 1987's Future World, which really, this was, I would say, was the best. While definitely it was for sure even more keyboard laced, more melodic, but this to me was the best combination of both. They just found a way on how to at least perfectly balance between being very keyboard laced, very melodic, though again very atmospheric, though it adds more to the atmosphere of the album than really being more so like, let's say, like your typical Bon Jovi record or Journey, or at least Foreigner at this time. Much less like that. Instead, just adding more to the atmosphere, but it still had the heavy riffs and so on. And of course, a very, again, just great riffs, and even in terms of the old biting guitar tone, it still had some of that, which again could have been due to, of course, the influence, of course, Flemming Rasmussen who was behind the engineer board, though technically he did produce it. Which should go in a little brief run there, is that while Eddie Kramer does get most of the credit, for at least producer's credit, he apparently was fired mid-session because apparently he fell asleep on the board. Yeah, well, to some people probably, well, let's say, well, probably because the music was boring. Well, that's only for those who probably doesn't care for at least the type of sound that's on it, even though it's a lot heavier than a lot of other bands, at least during this time, who were trying to be very commercial to the point where it was overdose, to where it really was, again, very much overdose. But this album, I think, was the perfect blending of every bit of that and just found a way to just balance out a lot of it. And I think definitely this and Red Hot and Heavy and the EP, definitely three of the band's best releases. So that brings us to, of course, 1990's Jump the Gun, which then we see, which Flaming Rasputin is nowhere to be found on this album. Instead, again, it's other than Deep Purple bass player Roger Glover. So, with all the praise I was given towards some of those releases, what do I think of Jump the Gun? Now, again, prior to me obtaining the box set, the only album or the releases I was really familiar with was the self-titled EP and, of course, Red Hot and Heavy. I heard many good things about Future World, and that definitely blew me away in some aspect. It definitely took, I really enjoyed that album. However, Jump the Gun, whoever you ask, it's either considered by many the last great release from Pretty Maids, or at times it is considered their weakest release. At times, maybe even their worst release, though apparently Sin Decade at times tends to take the cake, which I will never understand that. I will never understand that after listening to this album. This is probably the one time where I'm actually picking an album that I'm very lukewarm on, because I definitely fall under that category of people who think this is their weakest release, and Sin Decade, the album after this, is not even. It's not even. I don't even understand why some people will even consider this to be the last great album. It's the way I feel towards people who considered that Come Out and Play is one of Twisted Sister's best album. No, you obviously are drinking something for sure, and it's definitely not the good kind of alcohol. No, and it's definitely, as far when it comes to at least weed and so on, you must have got some really bad weed, because of just like we Come Out and Play, this is far from being Pretty Maids' best album. I mean, there's some fine songs on here. All right, let me get this out of the way. Let me get that, at least the good out of the way. We have Lethal Heroes, which again is the way it opens up. I do have to point this one out, though. While Futuro was a great balance between very much melodic, very keyboard-laced, but still very also combining the sort of heavy, very metal edge at least, this album took it even way more further in terms of this. There's almost at times very little edge to some of this album to me. Who knows, that could be Roger Glover's very dry production, and I'm not going to completely knock Roger Glover, okay? I'm not going to knock him. I mean, the only other bands he was ever used to producing was the Michael Schenker Group. He, of course, also produced Rainbow's. I think it might have been those three albums, if I am correct, meaning basically Down to Earth, Difficult to Cure, and Straight Between the Eyes, which are not bad albums, though I definitely tend to really also like Difficult to Cure, though I'm saving those opinions for whenever I basically spotlight that album. But then, of course, that's all the other bands I know that Roger Glover really did. This is probably the first band really outside. Now, I do have to point one little information out. Pretty Maids were pretty much discovered by Ian Gillan back at least in 1983. And, of course, I think, who knows, they might have opened up for Black Sabbath on the Born Again tour. They might have at one point, which is probably might have been why Ian Gillan might have discovered them and basically pretty much recommended them to, of course, the Friday Rock Show to have them get played on, again, on Tommy Vance's show. That's all I can think of. So, and of course, Ian Gillan around the same time even did a Christmas-esque track with Pretty Maids. But for Roger Glover here, definitely being the second again, who knows? He could have also recommended to Roger Glover that maybe check, and he probably, since they were looking for a producer, he might have at least maybe opened up his hand to it, probably because of Ian Gillan. Also, it should be pointed out that Roger Glover was also doing double duty during this time. He was producing Slaves and Masters, which of course was the only Deep Purple album with fucking Joe Turner. Who knows? Maybe because of who knows? Maybe Ian Gillan decided to actually take a break from Deep Purple to get away from. Maybe again decided to do work with Pretty Maids to get away from Richie Blackmore's very ego-ness, his childness. That's probably, again, it was the vacation from Richie Blackmore. Pretty Maids was his vacation. But anyways, I want to I'm trying to lighten up of this because of really, what else is to fucking talk about with this album other than, again, I think I stopped midway though when I was beginning to really kind of get into at least the first track here, Lethal Heroes, which again was also the second title for this album. Again, it opens up with, again, very atmospheric intro, kind of similar, though even more poppier. This has a very poppy intro compared to the intro that kicked off Future World. And then when we do get the track, it is a very much a late 80s Deep Purple-ish riff. And it's a fine track. It's actually one of the most decent, most better songs off this album. And it's, again, from here on, we get two more good tracks. I mean, Don't Settle for Less and Rock the House. Rock the House is definitely straight up Deep Purple sounding stuff. And good, at least good late 80s Deep Purple sounding. To where I would say, if this had been Slaves and Masters, I would have been a lot more, a little bit more receptive towards that album. The same thing goes for The Battle Rages On, which are obviously two of Deep Purple's weakest albums. And I definitely have no problem saying that. Those are by far two of Deep Purple's weakest albums. But when it comes to Pretty Maids, this is probably the weakest material, at least my Pretty Maids come up with, even though these are the three decent songs. The fourth decent song off this one would actually be the only goddamn fucking fast track on this goddamn album. That's, of course, is none other than Attention, which is, again, it's a great upbeat, very metal sounding track. It's heavy, but it's the only other track along with the first three that really sticks out at me. But what the fuck can I say for the rest of the goddamn album here? What is the rest that I can say? What is the rest? Savage Heart was actually a hit for the band. Another one was them using, I think they get called the New Jersey Choir, which adds a little bit of gospel feel to at least this very electric power ballad for this album. And it's a fine song, but it's not the best song. I think, if anything, I actually kind of prefer the more stripped down, more acoustic feel of this track that was on Stripped than the one here, because of it just sounds like your typical pop metal song. I mean, Future World had some of its fair share, but it had a way of being very, very heavy at the same time, like very unusual for your typical, what would be considered pop metal. Future World had a great balance in that. This one is just straight up pop at times, very much pop rock. I guess the only other decent song off of here, though, might be maybe Headlines. Maybe even the title track here. Also, I should also point out the song Hang Tough is actually a Icon song. Though, who knows, the thing is, it was never recorded for an actual studio album. It was only recorded live. There's at least a live release from Icon that was recorded in 1984. I think around the same time they had released their very first full-length album. Who knows, it could have been one of the songs that was probably planned to probably be, or was written for the first Icon, but didn't make it. I can see why. Pretty Maids, basically, now I haven't heard the live version from Icon, but the thing is, it was probably a good reason why they left it off the first icon. It's just there. It's just here on the album. Pretty Maids is basically, it just sounds like another fucking poppy metal track for this album. Very commercial sounding, though not of at least a good caliber. Over and out's fine. But how about the very last song that they handed out? Here, for the most part, there's a very electric, very guitar-driven album, though again, on the very lightweight, very commercial, late 80s, early 90s, again, almost AOR type of stuff. Very commercial-esque melodic metal hard rock. But the very last song, Dream On, which is not an Aerosmith cover, I'll let you know that, it's not an Aerosmith cover, is basically almost, good God, it sticks out though. It is probably the most song that really sticks out like a goddamn sore thumb. And it's the last one, so at this point you probably can either just turn the album off. It's got a very southern, very bluesy feel though. Again, almost, I wouldn't say country, but it goes for some of that. It's kind of similar to what Deep Purple will kind of do here and there as well, especially on some of the maybe the earlier albums, especially maybe Anyone's Daughter, maybe off of Fireball. This is kind of the typical stuff that Deep Purple were definitely known for doing when it comes to at least kind of, very get down kind of boogie, kind of southern acoustic kind of stuff, But for here, for some reason, I don't think it worked for Pretty Maids. It does not even work. It's basically what it just sounds like is pure fucking soundtrack fodder stuff. This is the stuff you would hear that would be used for a soundtrack, hell, or even for a B-side, not for your goddamn record. It is probably one of the worst songs off this album for me. And normally I don't mind some of this stuff, but for Pretty Maids, it just comes off so goddamn uncharacteristic that it almost even just ends up being one of the main reasons why this album is it's just not as good as Future World. And that's so this was the only album with Roger Glover producing, and again, his production here is a little bit dry for at least this band. It's an okay record when it comes to at least the realm of AOR, very melodic hard rock stuff. This is still one of the best of the crop when it comes to that. When it comes to at least Pretty Maids, who prior to this released 3 great releases, the fucking self-titled EP, Red Hot and Heavy, Future World. But we get to this album, and it's like, what the fuck just happened? It's like basically Pretty Maids on goddamn autopilot. This is as far from the best fucking album from them. 1990, good lord, no wonder that they couldn't even at least outlive the goddamn 90s in some ways. They were able to at least pull through, because after this, they kind of split up, but then I think they came back with, of course, Stripped, which is an all-acoustic album. It's on the set. No, 1993, actually, that came out in 1993. Again, they kind of, after that was Sin Decade. Okay, I kind of, fucked a little bit of the continuity when it comes to releases. But again, after this, they split up. And then, of course, they come back with Sin Decade with a slightly altered lineup, which was probably them kind of, it might have been them, cashing in on the hair metal stuff. But I'm just going to go by this. I'm just going to go by this and be real honest again. I think Sin Decade was at least more of a comeback. At least they came back with that album. And at least in some ways was a lot more redeemable. I just don't get why some people even consider this to be the last good or great album. It's not that great to begin with. It's not the worst album I've heard, but it's not even the best fucking album. I just don't get it. I don't really get it at all. I wanted to like this album. But I just don't get it. I'd rather take the hair metal of fucking Sin Decade than over this B-rate or C-rate fucking melodic heavy metal of this album. It just does nothing for me, for the most part. Nothing really sticks out too much, and it's also so goddamn mid-paced for the fact that it just ends up getting boring after a couple of fucking listens. And within the album, you just want something to be a lot more energetic and to get to attention, which is the closest thing to a good energetic track, but it's not enough to break enough of the formula of the album. And again, I like AC/DC records, but for some reason, I find AC/DC albums to be a lot more, at least, less formulaic compared to this. This has more of a goddamn formula compared to your average AC/DC record. I just don't get it. I don't get it. For some people that want to come in here, if there's anyone that really does like this album, and there's still one of those that considers to be the last great album, dispute your opinion. Dispute my opinion. Come on. I want to hear why you might consider this one the last great Pretty Maids album. I know they've released plenty of other albums after this. Again, they got back together in 1991, even though they split up. But apparently they also got back together that same year. Really? Did they really split up? Did they really? It's almost kind of tough to say if they really did. How can you once go, oh yeah, we split up in 1991. Oh, now we're back together. Ooh. It's like basically just saying, yeah, we're going on our final tour here. This is our final tour. And then they're like, no, it wasn't. We're back together. Whatever. I digress. This has gone on a little too long anyways. After that, they released a couple of albums, and they still seem to be going fine. They're still doing strong. Whether or not some people are receptive towards the albums, it seems like they've still done fine. But this album, nah. I can't completely say much about anything else right here. It's a fine record, it's okay, but it's just not that amazing. I just don't get the appeal of the fact that this is their last great album or good album. It's not that fucking good. It's just decent to average with at least 1, 3, or 4, at least good songs on this sound. The rest of it, again, it's just so mid-pace, formulaic, that at times just doesn't do anything. It goes nowhere most of the time. So there it is. There's my review, at least for Jump the Gun for Pretty Maids. There's my album of the week. For those who probably enjoyed this album, let me know what were your reasons for why you enjoyed this album. But for those who never heard this album, I just say you either start with at least the EP, if you can find a copy, or you just start with Red Hot and Heavy or Future World. Any of these two you can start with. But I would not start your album with your beginning with Pretty Maids with this album. I would not start off with this album. No way would I ever recommend starting off with Jump the Gun. I will not. So there you go. I hope you all enjoyed. This is Every Thrash. I'd say I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.